Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in about 60 seconds here while we allow people to trickle in. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar on diet and lifestyle for cancer prevention and survivorship, evidence over opinion. Before I hand things over to our two wonderful speakers, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. So yes, we are recording this session, and so we will send you an email with the slides and with the video recording, as well as your CPEU certificate for dietitians, definitely within 1 week, but hopefully by the end of this week. So keep an eye on your inboxes. We also hope you'll join us next month. Our next webinar is on Wednesday, November 15th, Whole Grains for Growing Minds, Nourishing the Next Generation. So that's being held on International Whole Grains Day, and our focus is really whole grains and kids and the importance during that life stage. So without further delay, I'm going to hand things over to our first speaker, Dr. Nigel Brockton, who is the Vice President of Research at the American Institute for Cancer Research. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to Old Ways for the opportunity to share some of our work. So as Kelly said, the title is Diet and Lifestyle for Cancer Prevention and Survivorship, Evidence over Opinion. And for about the next 25 minutes, I'm going to really go through the evidence that supports the recommendations that we make for diet and lifestyle. And then you get to hear from Karen Collins, who will talk about really how to put all these into practice. Not clicking forward. Why are you not clicking forward? There we go. I have no disclosures to make, no conflicts of interest. So I'm the Vice President of Research for the American Institute for Cancer Research, and we are considered the world's leading authority on the links between diet, weight, physical activity, and cancer prevention and survival. And we started in 1982, and this reputation as the leading authority really comes from the expert reports that we've done starting in 1997, where there was much less evidence and literature available. But that was the first expert report, really took the global literature to try and really, what is the consensus? What is the evidence versus the individual opinions? In 2007, there was much more research to work with, and we implemented a much more robust process of assessing all of that. We could do meta-analyses rather than just systematic literature reviews. And then in 2018, we launched the third expert report, which is still the most comprehensive assessment of the global literature. So in the title, we talk about cancer prevention. And I have to say I was slightly disappointed last year with the relaunching of the Cancer Moonshot, when President Biden said, we know cancer is a disease that we have few good ways to prevent. And I hope by the end of this session, you will realize that we do actually know really many very effective ways to reduce the risk of cancer. Another reason that we exist really is to try and get away from this we've all seen something that's good for you one week and bad for you the next week. And, this is just taking oatmeal as an example where, one week there's an article saying that it's bad for you and the next week it's good for you. And we're just, as I say, we're trying to distinguish evidence from opinion, cut through the noise of these one-off articles, and give people good, reliable evidence that they can, and recommendations that they can implement in their everyday lives. So the process by which this happens, everything starts with the protocol. So if you like, to the left of this slide is a protocol that defines the systematic literature review and meta-analysis. So really describing what you're going to do and then doing it by taking all of this literature. So just to give you an example, for breast cancer, the breast cancer report that came out in 2017 was 225 pages. The systematic literature review that's based on is over 2,000 pages. So there's like I like to call it a funnel of evidence from the global literature down to each cancer site, and then assessing all of that information in the printed report. And all of this is available online at dietandcancer.org. To then our recommendations, and these are the 10 recommendations that really define a kind of blueprint for a lifestyle. And I think one of the big changes over the years has been, going from these sort of this idea in the 80s when AICR started, from these sort of individual superfood magic bullets to an overall package of lifestyle behaviors. So the third expert report addressed 17 types of cancer, 51 million people, and 3.5 million cancer cases, and over 100 researchers involved. So it was a huge endeavor. And as I say, it's still the most comprehensive assessment of lifestyle in cancer. So these are our recommendations. I'm going to be going through these individually and the evidence that supports them. But a key fact, and this is a quote from Karen Collins back when we launched the third expert report, it's a call for action, not perfection. So really it's a case of, you don't have to meet all of these. If you can, fantastic. But the more you can meet, the lower your risk of cancer and your better outcomes after a cancer diagnosis. So just to spool back to the 1980s when AICR started, there was very low acceptance that you could do anything to change your risk of cancer. It was kind of heretical. But then in the 1990s, the first prevention guidelines came out. In the 2000s, those became strong evidence-based recommendations. We're now in the 2010, so to 2013, I think, was the first adherence paper that really showed a strong effect. So even though the recommendations are based on strong evidence, it was only it's in the last 10 years that we've had the evidence showing that by adhering to these recommendations, you actually do improve your outcomes. And now we're looking at them much, not just in terms of survivorship, but also and cancer risk, but also quality of life. And over these decades, this has gone from being a sort of heretical idea to accepted public health messaging. So I think AICR have done a great job. I've been with AICR for the last 6 years, but I've followed them since the first expert report came out in 1997. And I think they really have changed the view of lifestyle and cancer over those decades. So you're going to hear me talk about strong evidence a lot in this bit of me talking, because it's really, we only make recommendations for the factors that we have strong evidence. We can't make recommendations for every factor for which we have strong evidence. Just because if we have too many recommendations, people lose track. It's quite nice having that. There's a sort of, you see a lot of recommendations, and these initiatives will have like the healthy 8 or the 7 or the, ours are the 10 cancer prevention recommendations, and they're all based on strong evidence. But it's not uniform across different types of cancer, which factors for which we have strong evidence that they impact that cancer risk. The one that we know the most about is colorectal cancer. There are 10 factors, 5 that reduce your risk, 5 that increase your risk. So this, if you have a copy of the third expert report, the printed, this is in there. It's also available online. All the types of cancer down the left and the exposures along the top. For breast cancer, I'm going to be talking a bit more about breast cancer later on because this is October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We have 7 factors that we know are strongly associated, or strong evidence that they are causally associated with breast cancer risk. For something like prostate cancer, we really only have adult body fatness, and adult attained height, which unfortunately is not something you can really modify. So there are certainly gaps, but the cancer prevention recommendations are for all cancers, because we're trying to minimize the incidence of cancer in the population. So there are 10 recommendations. Excuse me. The first is be a healthy weight. The second is be physically active. And then there's 5 that really address diet and nutrition. And when we launched the third expert report, somebody asked, there's 1 for healthy weight, there's 1 for physical activity, and 5 for diet. Is that because diet's 5 times more important? Oh, sorry, is that because, is that because it's 5 times more important? And it's not that it's 5 times more important, but it is certainly 5 times, at least 5 times more complex. A healthy weight, you have some metrics you can use. Physical activity, it's easy to measure, but if you just tell somebody to eat a healthy diet, that can mean an awful lot of different things to different people. So each of the recommendations is really set out to try and guide people towards the healthiest possible diet. So the first one is be a healthy weight. Keep your weight within the healthy range and avoid weight gain in adult life. I'm not going to go through the rest. You can have access to all of the slides and read all the details, and Karen will be addressing some of those. But the evidence that this is based on is that for at least 12 types of cancer, IARC thinks has published 13 meningioma type of brain cancer is in there as well. But all of these cancers that are to the right of this line, the one unity line, are associated with obesity. The exception is premenopausal breast cancer, where early adulthood, higher BMI is associated with a reduced risk. We don't know exactly why. It had been seen before, and people had put it down to residual confounding and all sorts of things. It's definitely real, but we certainly wouldn't recommend that people put on weight in early adulthood to reduce their risk of premenopausal breast cancer, because the many effects it has subsequently. Be physically active. Be physically active as part of your everyday life. Walk more and sit less. And this is based on really, we count premenopausal and postmenopausal breast cancer as 2 types of cancer, because they are really different diseases with different risk factors. So there's 4 types of cancer that are strongly impacted by physical activity: colorectal cancer, second most common cancer worldwide, endometrial cancer, and pre and postmenopausal breast cancer. Many other benefits of physical activity, but certainly reducing your cancer risk is up there. So we'll start with the dietary related ones. And the first one is eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans. Make whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and pulses, legumes, such as beans and lentils, a major part of your usual daily diet. And over the decades, the evidence specifically for this recommendation And this is really where things started. The evidence is probably attenuated slightly, but still overall, there is a reduced risk of cancer with diets that are higher in fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Whole grains in particular have for every 90 grams per day of whole grains, you reduce your colorectal cancer risk by 17%. And again, colorectal cancer is one of the big four. And fiber probably plays a role in this as well. For every 10 grams per day, and the recommendation is at least 30 grams per day, you reduce your risk of colorectal cancer by 9%. There are weaker effects on other cancers, but overall, higher fiber diet, higher whole grains, more fruits and vegetables. Strong evidence for the individual aerodigestive cancers, the panel didn't rate the effect of fruits and vegetables as being strong evidence, but overall, if you aggregate the upper aerodigestive cancers, that was considered strong evidence. And just to give you an idea of, so this is a non-linear dose response for fiber, and you'll see that vertical orange line is at 30 grams, which is the minimum recommendation per day. But you really don't see an impact of fiber on cancer risk until you get to that 30, and this is for postmenopausal breast cancer, until you get to that 30 grams per day. And we really should be aiming for more than that, so you can really take advantage of that risk reduction. The next recommendation is limit consumption of fast foods and other processed foods high in fat, starches, and sugars. So limiting these foods will help control calorie intake and maintain a healthy weight. So the evidence that this is based on really isn't from the cancer domain, but is from the obesity domain, because the obesity research world was kind of ahead of us on defining these foods and measuring their intakes. At the same time that we published the third expert report, we did the diet, nutrition, and physical activity, energy balance, and body fatness, the determinants of weight gain, overweight, and obesity. And you'll see fast foods in there is increasing the risk of obesity, and only in the limited suggestive category, but you can see whole grains, fruits, and vegetables there for decreasing your risk of obesity. Limit consumption of red and processed meat. Eat no more than moderate amounts of red meat, such as beef, pork, and lamb. Eat little, if any, processed meat. And so this is red and processed meat together, a 12% increased risk in colorectal cancer per 100 grams per day. We often get a little bit of flack for allowing any red meat. Before I get on to that, the mechanism by which red and processed, or this particularly red meat, increases cancer risk, that's part of what my PhD was on 25 years ago. There are cooking dependent and independent mechanisms. Back 20 years ago, it was all about the heterocycloamines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, these sort of charrings of food. That probably contributes, but also the heme iron that is just intrinsic in red meat can have an impact on DNA repair, can affect the microbiome. There's this new 5-GC, which is a glycan that creates an inflammatory response, which is only found in red meat. So there are many different ways that red and processed meats, because a lot of processed meats are made out of red meats. We don't know how each one of these contributes, but we know that the association is strong and reproducible. So we make the recommendation to limit intake. And the reason we allow some red meat is because at low levels, there's not a significant risk, and it's really above that sort of 100 grams per day, but we don't recommend 100 grams a day because that's already getting close to that point where it's causing some harm. So very moderate amounts if you choose to eat it at all. Limit consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks. It's another one that's driven by the link with obesity, which will overtake smoking as the predominant risk factor for cancer in the not too distant future. And sugar-sweetened drinks strongly associated with obesity. They're drunk by half of Americans every day. They're the single greatest contributor of added sugars, and they're also arguably one of the quickest wins and easiest wins for meeting our recommendations to take these out of your daily exposure. Limit alcohol consumption. For cancer prevention, it's best not to drink. And I know this is an unpopular message in many areas, but there are 6 types of cancer for which alcohol increases your risk. And while there are different dose response curves, esophageal and breast cancer, any amount of alcohol increases your risk from a few grams per day. From daily drinking, they increase your risk. So there's no safe dose. If you choose to drink, keep it under the national guidelines. There is a decreased risk of kidney cancer with alcoholic drinks, but again, a bit like the early adulthood obesity, the kidney cancer isn't that common a cancer, so you'd be increasing your risk of all the other cancers at the expense of trying to reduce the risk of a fairly rare cancer. And it doesn't really matter what you drink, whether it's beer, wine, spirits, they all increase your risk. So this health halo of red wine, I'm sorry, it's not, you can't justify it. Don't take supplements for cancer prevention. There are reasons to take supplements, but cancer prevention is not one of them. There's no strong evidence that these reduce your risk, and particularly in the survivorship setting, some of them can interfere with treatment. For mothers, breastfeed your baby if you can. It's good for both the mother and the baby. I'm not going to dwell on that one too much, but it does lead us nicely into October being Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And as I mentioned earlier on, of these recommendations, there are a lot of them are directly relevant to breast cancer. There are 7 factors in our recommendations for which we have strong evidence that you can change your risk. Being physically active, being a healthy weight, which you'll see can go both ways depending on whether you're talking about pre or post-menopausal breast cancer. Breastfeeding, the diet and the whole grains, vegetables, fruits and beans is only really in that limited suggestive category, but certainly no detrimental effects. Limiting alcohol and being a healthy weight. So these are all, breast cancer is the most common breast cancer in women in the US. So these are all ways that you can substantially change your risk. And evidence that's come out in the past, since we published the 3rd expert report, shows that lifestyle actually has a stronger effect in people who are at a stronger family risk, whether it's BRCA1, 2 carriers or people with a family history. And we didn't know when we published, this is all evidence that's come out in the last 5 years, it was plausible that genetics could have overwhelmed lifestyle, or it could be that lifestyle is more important. And what we know now is that lifestyle is particularly important in those people at a higher risk. This is for premenopausal breast cancer, largely the same factors, just that difference in body fat, the impact of body fatness. And after cancer diagnosis, follow recommendations if you can. There is a growing number of cancer survivors, 32 million people worldwide living with a cancer diagnosis, with or after a cancer diagnosis. And the panel, in coming up with this recommendation, said there's persuasive evidence that diet, nutrition, physical activity predict outcomes, and limited evidence on changing the impact of changing these. So where the research is really trying to push for stronger evidence is, if you lose weight, if you change your behaviors, does it change your outcomes? But we know the people that have these healthier behaviors at diagnosis have better outcomes. And also that these are unlikely to be harmful for people who have finished their treatment. People undergoing treatment should consult with their healthcare team to make sure that these are all compatible and not going to cause any problems with their treatment. And it's a research into cancer survivors is a key current and future direction for AICR. And we just last year published an update of the cancer survivor work, because in 2014 we did this, and nothing reached the bar of strong evidence, which survivorship is a newer topic, if you like, and this was very disappointing. But when we repeated this with an additional 7 years of evidence, still a lot of things are in this limited suggestive category. I've outlined these here, the predefined healthy diets, so dietary patterns. Soy foods, there was a big controversy for a while that soy foods, because of their phytoestrogen effects, could actually increase breast cancer or increase the progression. No, they definitely seem, or they don't seem to increase risk, and there's pretty good evidence that they may reduce and improve survival. Dietary fiber, serum vitamin D. The one that is strongest, and the only one that we have strong evidence, is for measures of body fatness, body mass index, waist circumference, waist hip ratio, for overall mortality. And my Zoom bar is hiding the bar at the top there. So I've talked a lot about the recommendations, and we worked with the NCI after the third expert report to develop a standardized scoring mechanism. So basically to try and measure how well people are adhering to the recommendations. And cut a long story short, the lower your adherence, the higher your cancer risk, the lower your survival, and the higher your adherence, there are many benefits: enhanced quality of life, physical functioning, reduced fatigue, nausea and pain. One study tried to quantify it in terms of the additional survival per recommendation was 1.6 years. I mean, that's just one paper, but in one way of measuring it. Lower metabolic syndrome in cancer survivors, and reduced cancer risk and mortality. And there's some pretty big numbers. So 58% lower colorectal cancer risk, 51% lower breast cancer risk, 33% lower mortality. But again, what we're calling for is action, not perfection. But there is a gradient that the more of these you can meet, the better off you are. Good, quick, and Karen's going to talk more about this, but the Cancer Health Check is just a very quick online tool where it takes 2 or 3 minutes to do. You just put in a few details to tell you how well you're meeting the cancer prevention recommendations, and it's really based on a operationalization of the score that we developed with the NCI. So thank you very much. I got through that in just about the right time, and I'll hand you over to Karen. and we'll do questions at the end.
You see my screen? So now that Nigel has discussed the AICR cancer prevention recommendations and the strength of evidence behind them, let's explore the key messages and action steps to put these recommendations into practice. I have no disclosures relevant to this presentation. In this section of our presentation, we're going to talk about how you communicate about these recommendations. We'll flag some common misconceptions, identify potential barriers that people may see, and frame key messages with flexibility for your patients and clients. So first, let's talk about weight. Advising people to be a healthy weight is not so simple given the prevalence of obesity today. However, excess adiposity has a strong relationship, as Nigel was explaining, to cancer risk, with an increased risk of at least 12 different cancers. So it is something that we need to talk about. And yes, obesity can be associated with a variety of lifestyle factors that increase cancer risk, but studies show physiological effects of excess body fat itself. Adipose tissue is the primary site of estrogen synthesis in postmenopausal women, and so obesity's link to these estrogen-sensitive cancers likely involves increased levels of bioavailable sex hormones. Excess dysfunctional adipose tissue is the source of cytokines that, along with reduced levels of the anti-inflammatory adiponectin, can lead to chronic low-grade inflammation, which is one of the hallmark characteristics enhancing and enabling cancer development. And obesity is associated with elevated levels of insulin, insulin-like growth factors, and leptin, which can promote the growth of cancer cells. Now, at the population level, studies show lowest cancer risk at the lower end of BMI. But we know that the same BMI and even the same waist size can represent different levels of body fat in people who differ in ethnic background, age, and other factors. As health professionals, we talk with individuals about a weight and waist that are healthy for them. And we need to be able to talk about weight removed from this culture of body shaming. We need to clarify that people can take positive actions without restrictive diets that promote a cycle of weight loss and regain. For people with overweight or obesity, modest amount of intentional weight loss, about 5 or 10%, can produce clinically significant changes in biomarkers of cancer risk, such as insulin resistance, estrogen, and markers of inflammation. For people with excess body fat, modest intentional weight loss may reduce cancer risk, but as Nigel was explaining, right now the amount and quality of long-term data is still too limited to support a weight loss recommendation specifically to reduce cancer risk. For another perspective, avoiding weight gain can be a well-supported goal for people who are either at a currently healthy weight and those with overweight. Next up, physical activity is part of everyday life. We need to reshape our messages about physical activity and disentangle it from discussions about weight. Yes, let's help people understand that physical activity can indirectly reduce cancer risk through its role in reaching and maintaining a healthy weight. But physical activity also has direct physiological effects likely to be cancer protective, including improved levels of insulin and sex steroid hormones and better immune function. Help people get started by enabling them to set attainable goals. Look for ways to incorporate physical activity in what they're already doing and add in blocks of activity to break up extended sedentary time. Aim to help people find ways to enjoy activity and tune into how it makes them feel so that they don't need to reward activity with food. Next, a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and pulses. Goals are to include whole grains, non-starchy vegetables, fruits, and legumes in most meals, and in doing so, to accumulate a total of at least 30 grams of fiber from food sources each day. Now, yes, cancer risk is reduced with 5 or more moderate-sized servings of non-starchy vegetables and fruits each day. Vegetables beyond 2.5 cups a day are recommended in guidelines focused on cardiovascular disease. And consumption beyond this level is linked with a further decrease in cancer risk. But it's critical that we meet people where they are. And the biggest difference in cancer risk is between those with very low intake of vegetables and fruits and those who include 5 a day. So a simple talking point, start by including some vegetable or fruit in every meal, then add more for additional benefits. And rather than emphasizing fresh as the gold standard, encourage people to use options that work for them, whether that's fresh, frozen, or canned choices that don't contain excess added sugars, sodium, and calories. You can help people find small steps that work for them. Some people less comfortable with change might move forward by swapping familiar vegetables and fruits for some of the refined grains or meat that they're currently using in typical dishes. Other people who see vegetables and fruits as boring, well, we need a different approach with them, and we can help them find new enjoyment with ideas for different flavorings and combinations, perhaps from global cuisines that inspire them. Here's one point that can sometimes be confusing. The recommendations talk about non-starchy vegetables. To be clear, this does not mean that we suggest avoiding choices like potatoes, but people need to be wary of typical portions and preparation methods. Potatoes account for almost 1/3 of US vegetable consumption, and more than half of that is as French fries and chips and other processed products. But rather than disparaging potatoes, focus on increasing vegetable consumption by expanding variety. For many people who aren't meeting the recommendations for whole grains and pulses, it's helpful to ask if there's something particular holding them back. For some people, misinformation they've heard may produce doubts about these foods, and asking the question gives you a chance to put those claims that people are hearing in perspective. Some sources claim that lectins, compounds found in whole grains, pulses, and soy foods, are pro-inflammatory. But these claims are based on rodent studies with high doses of the active form of lectins. Actually, proper cooking inactivates lectins and sharply reduces amounts. Gluten, of course, needs to be avoided by people with celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but claims that it's anti-inflammatory are not supported for other people. And fear of soy foods is common, especially in women concerned about estrogen-sensitive cancers because of their isoflavone compounds that have been labeled as phytoestrogens. But as Nigel noted, claims of risk are based on high doses of isolated compounds in early cell and rodent studies. Dose matters. Soy food consumption is not associated with increased cancer risk, and some studies suggest potential for protective effects. We need to put these fear-inducing laboratory studies in the context of human research related to food. Whole grains and dietary fiber reduce risk of colorectal cancer and may reduce risk of weight gain and obesity. And fermentable dietary fiber, like that in pulses, is used by the gut microbiota to create short-chain fatty acids that seem to promote intestinal cell health and produce anti-inflammatory effects. For people whose reluctance to include whole grains and legumes comes from lack of familiarity, you can show them how to include these foods in dishes they already enjoy with flavors they love. For people held back by concern that whole grains and beans take too much time to fix, talk to them about the quick fix options. For people who object that healthy eating is too costly, use this concern as an inroad to highlight how they reduce their food costs by replacing some or all of the meat in a meal with beans. The bottom line is that this recommendation is calling for a mostly plant-based diet, but this wording can be tricky. Some people use the term plant-based diet to refer to a plants-only or vegan diet. We need to be clear that many different approaches can make plant foods the foundation of a daily food consumption. When you look at the body of research overall, you reduce cancer risk by choosing an abundance of nutrient-rich plant foods, and that's more important than whether you eat only plants or mostly plants. Eating for health is not just what you do today or this week, but creating a dietary pattern that fits individual needs and preferences and that people can enjoy long-term. Next, limit consumption of fast foods and other processed foods high in fat, starches, or sugars. As Nigel noted, this recommendation isn't targeting a direct effect of these foods on cancer risk, but the cancer risk of excess adiposity. Studies show that these foods promote weight gain, overweight, and obesity when consumed frequently or in large portions. Now, there's several nuances in talking about this recommendation too. Most foods undergo some form of processing. The point here is to limit foods that are highly processed in ways that increase calories and reduce nutrients. Ultra-processed foods aren't all the same. In observational studies linking ultra-processed food consumption with weight gain or with cancer, this reflects high consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks, processed meat, French fries, pizza, and ready-to-eat or heat meals. People with lower cancer risk in these studies may include 2 or 3 ultra-processed foods a day. So if people use processed foods, show them how to be selective, choosing those that help them stick with an overall healthy diet, limiting those that are high in added fat, starches, and sugars. The next recommendation is to limit red meat and eat little, if any, processed meat. As Nigel said, this is based mainly on their association with increased risk of colorectal cancer. Now, red meat refers to all mammalian meat, but for most Americans, we're talking about beef, lamb, and pork. For lower risk of heart disease, choosing lean meat is recommended, but the mechanisms discussed most likely linking red meat with cancer risk aren't based on fat content. So for now, our best message is to consider all red meat within the recommended limit of no more than 12 to 18 ounces a week. Now, typically, this means having it no more than 3 times a week. But if people choose deck of cards, 3-ounce size portions, then they could have it 4 to 6 times a week. Processed meat refers to meat that is smoked, cured, salted, or has added preservatives. Common examples include bacon, ham, sausage, hot dogs, and other lunch meats. People often ask about alternative versions. What about turkey hot dogs? What about sausage that's made with no added nitrates but has celery powder in it? But the data on these foods is very limited. These products are usually either smoked or cured, so they're still best left to minimal use. Processed meat poses even greater risk for colorectal cancer than unprocessed red meat, so it warrants more caution, keeping amounts to no more than occasional use. People may ask about specific limits, but research hasn't identified a threshold of a safe amount of consumption. Since U.S. adults average several servings a week, a reasonable approach is simply to encourage people to cut back as much as possible. Well, for people who've been used to having red and processed meats as a major portion of their eating habits, they can be struggling to imagine what an unearthed diet without them would even look like, or with lower amounts, what that would look like. So first, as long as plant foods remain the largest part of the plate, the AICR cancer prevention recommendations don't have advised any specific limits on poultry, fish, or dairy. Limited evidence suggests that fish consumption may be associated with lower risk of liver and colorectal cancer, and it is recommended for cardiovascular health. So swapping some meat meals for fish is one strategy you could discuss. Research as a whole does not support claims that even moderate dairy consumption increases cancer risk. There may be legitimate reasons why people choose to eliminate dairy from their diet, but doing so for cancer prevention would not be supported by the evidence. Now, stepping back to the bigger picture, beyond swapping red and meat for other animal foods, we can encourage people to see a change in meat consumption as an opportunity to reorient their plates in a shift toward the recommendations for an overall plant-focused diet. Smaller meat portions mean more room on the plate for whole grains and veggies. Without the ground meat or sausage in pasta and soups, it creates the perfect spot for beans or lentils. Skipping the bacon or sausage gives a space in sandwiches for some avocado or some fruit or tomato slices with breakfast. The next recommendation is to limit consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks. This is another recommendation that isn't associated with a direct effect on cancer risk. The recommendation is to limit sugar-sweetened drinks because they're a concentrated source of calories that make it easy to overconsume calories beyond our needs, and studies show that frequent consumption promotes weight gain. Our key message here is to drink water as the primary beverage choice, along with other unsweetened drinks like tea or coffee or sparkling water. Overall evidence does not link moderate consumption of beverages sweetened with non-nutritive sweeteners with increased cancer risk. So the question is whether it is or is not helpful for each individual in reaching and maintaining a healthy weight or managing other health conditions. In most cases, it's best not to recommend 100% fruit juice as a swap for excess sugar-sweetened beverages, because large amounts there could also lead to weight gain. But we don't need to advise people to completely switch away from all juice, simply encourage more solid fruit to meet the goals of increased fruit consumption. And next, let's talk about that alcohol recommendation. Alcohol is a cause of at least 6 different cancers. As alcohol is metabolized, it generates acetaldehyde, which is a human carcinogen, and alcohol may act through other mechanisms, such as increased levels of estrogen, an established risk factor for breast cancer. People often associate alcohol with heart health, but alcohol in amounts beyond moderation can raise blood pressure and serum triglycerides. And associations of moderate drinking with heart health in observational studies may sometimes reflect confounding by cultural, diet, and lifestyle habits in areas like the Mediterranean, and an effect called abstainer bias, in which people who quit drinking for health reasons are grouped with non-drinkers and then compared with moderate drinkers. As Nigel noted, wine seems to have a health halo for many people, but again, despite laboratory findings on resveratrol, the phytochemical that's found in red wine, human research shows that the association between alcohol and cancer risk is consistent, regardless of whether it's beer, distilled spirits, white wine, or red wine. As we talk about alternatives to alcohol, we can talk about non-alcoholic drinks like sparkling water, reduced alcohol drinks like wine spritzers and low alcohol beer. But, let's also talk about alternatives for how people use alcohol. Is it part of how they socialize? What other options are there? Is it part of how they manage stress? What other options are there? For cancer prevention, not drinking alcohol is best. For those who choose to drink, limit intake to no more than 2 drinks a day for men or 1 drink a day for women. And one more important talking point here as you discuss this with people: 1 drink is not just whatever fits in 1 glass. It's based on the amount that provides 14 grams of ethanol. That's normally 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of distilled spirits. But with today's larger glass sizes and higher alcohol beverages, it's getting easy for what someone thinks is 1 drink to pose more risk than it would seem. Next, don't turn to supplements for cancer prevention. Dietary supplements can be valuable to fill a specific nutrient gap for some people, but human research does not support dietary supplements as an effective strategy to reduce cancer risk. Now, for some people, a supplement can seem like insurance when people think especially that only unrealistically high levels of vegetables and fruits can protect health. We need to emphasize that achievable amounts of nutrient-rich foods are enough to reduce cancer risk. And we need to educate people that the concept, well, if some is good, more must be better, does not apply to reducing cancer risk. Studies show that too little and too much of nutrients may both pose health risks. A key message is that getting nutrients and phytocompounds from food brings a whole range of protectors that act in multiple ways against cancer development. And even botanical supplements can interfere with cancer treatment and with other medications when the compounds they contain compete with shared metabolic pathways, resulting either in decreased circulating amounts of the active treatment compound or increased amounts that raise likelihood of toxicities. And finally, for cancer survivors. People who've been diagnosed with cancer have diverse nutrition issues, both during and after cancer treatment, and that can be important in the short term and for long-term survival. AICR recommends during cancer treatment, acute treatment, these recommendations may or may not be appropriate for any given individual. After the acute stage of treatment, cancer survivors are advised to follow the recommendations for cancer prevention, if possible, and unless otherwise advised by a qualified health professional. Weight and weight change after a cancer diagnosis are important issues. Overweight, obesity, and large weight gains are associated with worse outcomes in some types of cancer. But weight and BMI don't reflect only body weight or body fat. They also reflect lean muscle, bone, and water balance. Unplanned weight loss, especially when it means loss of lean body mass, can interrupt treatment and poses significant risks. Sarcopenia, meaning the loss of skeletal muscle and strength, may especially get overlooked in people with overweight or obesity, yet it puts people at risk of poor outcomes regardless of body fat level. Because of these negative effects of loss of unintentional weight loss, there's been a lot of concern about the safety of intentional weight loss after a cancer diagnosis. Clinical trials are actively investigating this, and so far show that even modest weight loss of 5% or more may improve markers of inflammation and metabolic health in cancer survivors. More research is needed now to understand if there are longer-term benefits. For now, this is something that individuals need to discuss with their own healthcare provider, putting the question about weight in context of their overall health. Evidence does support finding a balance, not making people anxious over every little pound, while encouraging adjustments to keep eating appropriate for calorie needs. Altogether, this is the set of 10 AICR recommendations that address the major modifiable risk factors for cancer after smoking. They call attention to physical activity, weight and weight change, and eating habits built around nutrient-rich plant foods while limiting red and processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, and other foods higher in calories than nutrients and alcohol. How do we talk about these in a way that reduces the overwhelm? A starting message is that this is good news. Research has identified a variety of steps people can take to reduce their cancer risk. And rather than getting distracted by the hundreds that they hear about in the media, these call out 10 steps that are backed by the strongest evidence. You can point out that these recommendations really fit together as a package. Each step forward on one recommendation can make it easier to move forward on several others. The recommendations all work together with beneficial effects on multiple different pathways that support health. And the good news is that the studies show it's not just when people master all these recommendations perfectly that we see lower cancer risk. Each step closer helps. As we talk about cancer risk and survivorship, we need to help people understand that all information is not equal. When you talk to people about reducing cancer risk, one of the most important points you make may be to emphasize the value of basing choices on recommendations and reports from trusted authorities like AICR, not on single studies and hearsay. We need to clarify that there are many different ways to implement these recommendations to fit individual health needs and lifestyle preferences. Listen to where people see barriers, and we can talk about flexible ways to meet them. On the AICR website, you'll find lots of resources to make it easier for you to share these recommendations and key messages. You can access the AICR WCRF reports, as well as the food facts library, recipes, and responses to questions on hot topics. One way to make it simpler for people to focus on one or two next steps is to use AICR's Cancer Health Check. With this free online tool, in less than 5 minutes, you answer a series of questions about what you eat, how much you move, and other lifestyle choices. And it shows how individual choices fit in the context of an overall lifestyle and help set personalized priorities for next steps. The New American Plate is AICR's approach to putting these recommendations on healthy eating into practice, starting with the overall proportions of foods in a meal, and then looking at appropriate portions and food choices. I love this as a starting point for talking about the diet-related recommendations. You start by showing people the overall plant-focused pattern, and then you can dive in to look at more specifics of foods to build up and foods to limit. The Healthy 10 Challenge is a free online program to support putting the AICR recommendations into practice one step at a time. It features a weekly challenge, and in accordance with research on behavior change, people are encouraged to set a specific, measurable, achievable goal, and then they get ideas for how to make sustainable behavior changes. You can use the challenge with individual patients or in group programs. Now, it may not be appropriate for all people during cancer treatment, but for those whose individual circumstances make the recommendations appropriate for them, this free program could be an excellent connection to reliable information and ongoing support. I want to thank Old Ways for this opportunity to be with you today, and thank you for participating. And now the question is, what questions you have that we can discuss?
Thank you so much to both of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who's been sending questions in. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. We won't have time to get through them all, but we'll try and address as many as we can. And I think to start us off, we've had a lot of questions come in about non-nutritive sweeteners like aspartame. Could either of you speak to if there's a relationship between those? Yeah.
So people are probably aware that earlier this year, the World Health Organization reclassified aspartame as possibly carcinogenic to humans, which really isn't a very helpful designation. We kind of, particularly WCRF, work closely with the World Health Organization, but on this one, I think it makes things harder for people. We know that sugar sweetened beverages increase the risk of obesity, and that's a very strong risk factor for cancer. Aspartame, for me, the fact that it is fully hydrolyzed in the gut, which to aspartic acid, methanol, and phenylalanine, which are present in other foods and fruits and vegetables, you know, when you do cell experiments with high doses, it's just not the exposure that your cells are subjected to. So the safe limit is something like 14 cans of non-sweetened or artificially sweetened soda. I don't think people should be drinking that much of anything other than water. So it shouldn't be a concern. And really, if you're drinking that much soda or putting these sachets in you should be trying to limit that anyway.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then could you speak to if these recommendations for cancer prevention differ from the recommendations for cancer survivorship at all, or are they kind of one and the same?
We're still working on the cancer survivor ones for the moment, because when you start looking at individual types of cancer and individual subtypes of cancer, it's different to when you're trying to prevent cancer as a whole. So there are going to be some nuances to that, but overall, this is still, we think, very good advice.
Thank you both. Well, it looks like we're just running out of time here.
I know we're running out of time, but I just got to say, the questions that came up in the Q&A are the best I've ever seen from doing these webinars. So congratulations to our audience.
And we'll be saving these, and who knows, perhaps they will inspire a future seminar on one of these topics. So thank you again. I love that message from Karen about inspiring action, not perfection. And I hope to see you all at a future webinar. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.